Welcome back, everybody. A man called a serial killer is now connected to Austin's most infamous cold case, the yogurt shop murders. Police say DNA and ballistics evidence helped them finally identify Robert Brashears as the person who shot and killed 4 girls more than 3 decades ago. KXAN anchor Avery is joining us again this half hour to explain more about why investigators believe he was in Texas at the time of that crime. And Avery, there is some other evidence that they've pointed to today and talked about.
Yes, you know, the news conference was nearly an hour and a half, tons of information, years of evidence testing. Detectives say, though, they've now connected Brashears to many violent assaults and murders throughout the 90s across the country, many of them fitting the same MO or sharing similar details to the yogurt shop murders. But as I mentioned, the DNA testing and ballistics evidence really helped definitively place him at this scene. Now, less than 48 hours after firefighters and ultimately homicide detectives responded to the yogurt shop in North Austin, police say they learned Robert Brashears was stopped at a Border Patrol checkpoint on I-10 between El Paso and Las Cruces. Law enforcement there at the time reported they felt like something was up, but he evaded them. He was ultimately arrested for auto theft, and at the time they say he was in possession of a pistol, a .380, that we now know is connected to the yogurt shop. The gun was taken, but it did eventually land back in the hands of Brashears' father. Okay, track with me here. That was in 1991. Now fast forward to this summer, 2025. Detective Jackson, who had taken over the case for APD, said he realized that some evidence from that gun had not been submitted in years to a national network of ballistics data known as NIBUS. So they submitted it, and he said very quickly after they got a hit that essentially connected the gun to an unsolved crime from the 90s in Kentucky. Now, investigators today did not reveal specific details on that Kentucky case. They're waiting for law enforcement in that area to release some of those details, but investigators say it does share a very similar MO.
Yeah, we're definitely waiting on those details from Kentucky to see what happened in that particular case. But meanwhile, police had shared they are testing and retesting different DNA evidence from the scene as technology has frankly gotten better over these last few decades. So how did that all play a role in what comes next?
We have to remember a lot of this is happening simultaneously, and as we've reported over the years, so many different updates. But Austin detectives redid a search recently that they had actually done back in 2018. This time, though, a lab out of South Carolina got a match to a 1990 sexual assault and murder out of Greenville, South Carolina. Those detectives then knew there was a match, but then had to wait 2 long weeks, they say, for it to be particularly confirmed. And the detective even noted it's because it was really the first time that this lab had been asked to run a search of this kind or this type. But Detective Jackson ultimately said he finally learned the name of the man who they called essentially a perfect match to the yogurt shop murders. Even still, though, they did more testing and they're doing more police work. The testing did conclude that some of the DNA found under the fingernails of the youngest victim, Amy Ayers, played a key role.
Well, anybody out there can read more about what we've learned so far from this investigation, but we've even heard from some of those detectives, right?
Right. You know, I think one of the most moving moments, and I mean, there were so many between the family's testimony and even city leaders, but the detective explaining that key piece of evidence from Amy was gut-wrenching. So I'd like to take a listen to that.
And this was going to be it. We were pushing all of our chips on the table with this. This was going to be the last shot effort with some of this DNA. But we were pretty confident with the technology and the circumstances that this was going to be pay dirt. One of the things we retested was Amy's fingernail clippings from the autopsy. They were able to get quite a bit of STR product DNA out of Amy's fingernail clippings, and it was directly compared to Brashears' profile, and it matched so that it's 2.5 million to 1 that it's likely Robert Brashears underneath Amy's fingernails than it is to an unknown individual.
And you know, well, he later went on to say that Amy's final moments on this earth ultimately helped them solve this case because she fought back against her attacker. Really just a striking moment. As I mentioned, though, we heard from Amy's family and other victims' families, people who loved each of those 4 girls. And if you talk to anybody related to this case, they will tell you how much the families mattered in getting this breakthrough to happen. They were pushing and pushing. You know, I sat down with former District Attorney Margaret Moore, who started a task force focused on this case.
Right.
And she emphasized that the families pushed for that meeting that led to that task force. So I just don't think that can be understated, how much they cared about not letting this case go stale. You can listen to more of that conversation with the former DA and of course more sound from the victims' families that I encourage everyone to go listen to on our website, KXAN.com.
Of course, and another moment from the Ayers family was that they plan to start a foundation to help support other cold case initiatives and try to bring some of that closure to other families across the country, because we know there are thousands of these cases like this happening out there. So Avery, Travis, thanks again for being with us.
Thanks, Will.